Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we break down the fast-moving developments in Israel and the Gaza Strip, CIA covert operations in Venezuela, the latest on the Pentagon's feud with the press, and we take you inside this week's AUSA convention in Washington. And then our colleague John Seward has an exclusive interview with Joe DeAntona, Vice President for Requirements and Capabilities, Land and Air Defense at Raytheon. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent at the Washington Times, and I'm joined as always by my esteemed co-host, Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times. Apologies for my voice sounding a bit less than podcast quality today. I'm a bit under the weather, and Guy and I are both coming off a frantic few days at the Association of the United States Army Conference in Washington, which we'll talk more about later in the show. And our colleague John Seward has an exclusive interview from the floor of that show with Joe DeAntona of Raytheon. They'll talk about the role of the Patriot missile system and the Golden Dome missile shield, new Raytheon capabilities like the Deep Fires autonomous launcher, whether the U.S. military industrial sector is actually moving too fast for America's allies to keep up with. But before we get to that, Guy, first things first, as always, what's on your radar right now?
Well, first of all, Ben, I accept your apology. I think you sound great, and thanks for being here. It is great to be back here with you on the podcast. I know I was away last week, and a heck of a week we've actually had on the global security front in recent days, beginning with President Trump's whirlwind trip to the Middle East, where he spoke at the Israeli Knesset before going to Egypt to ink the U.S. brokered Israel-Hamas ceasefire at a signing ceremony that was very interestingly attended by leaders, or at least delegations, from more or less all of the top Arab powers in the Middle East, as well as the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, who heads the Palestinian government in the West Bank. The optics of all of that were very interesting, Ben. Off the top, while this ceasefire and the hostage releases by Hamas have been pretty groundbreaking after 2 years of very dangerous escalations in war in the Middle East, our own coverage has taken a hard look at the extent to which Mr. Trump maybe has overplayed some of this, essentially jumping the shark by declaring historic peace in the Middle East, despite the reality that there are still major uncertainties over the future of security in Gaza on both the very near and long-term horizons. It remains unclear, for instance, whether Hamas is actually going to disarm now and who ultimately will take control of security in Gaza. If Hamas does not disarm, it feels like there's this ominous possibility that Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, could suddenly re-engage this war or push Israeli troops right back into a combat footing in Gaza. It's a fluid situation, Ben. We're tracking it in our reporting on the Threat Status platform at the Washington Times. One thing on my radar is the extent to which European powers and Arab powers really lined up behind President Trump as the ceasefire was signed. These are countries that are really outraged over how intense that the Israeli military's destruction of Gaza has been. And I think part of their support for Trump's declarations of a bigger peace is that they really want to sort of cement the narrative that the Israel-Hamas war is actually over, so that the onus would then, or the narrative, let's say, would then put the onus on Israel to uphold its side of the ceasefire. Of course, we don't know what Hamas will do on the other side. We unpacked some of that in our coverage in recent days, Ben. I want to switch gears, though. I'm also tracking the widening of the U.S. war on drug cartels. the Trump administration announced in recent days that U.S. forces had carried out a fifth strike on alleged drug cartel boats near Venezuela. This underscores how President Trump is willing to use the power of the U.S. military to stop what he calls, quote, illicit narco-terrorist networks, end quote. We're watching very closely now whether this campaign could expand directly into Venezuela, Ben. Trump personally confirmed on October 15 that he has authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela, and he said that he's weighing whether or not to carry out some sort of land operations in Venezuela. If that happens, Ben, it would represent a major policy shift by the United States towards South America. How will the rest of the region respond? How will President Trump's end all wars, MAGA base respond? In a sense, the president is playing with what could be fire here. We're tracking it closely in the threat status pages, Ben. I hope listeners will go and check out our coverage. Finally, one more thing, really the biggest thing on my radar in recent days, Ben, has been the Association of the U.S. Army, AUSA conference that's been playing out in downtown Washington, D.C. This is basically the biggest military-industrial complex weapons show and powwow with the U.S. Army that occurs every year in Washington. You were there with me on the weapons exhibition floor in recent days, Ben. So was John Seward, Threat Status's new NatSec Tech lead journalist, as well as our creative video team headed by the great David Gordon. Of course, we have a slew of videos out there from the floor, Ben. There are a couple highlights really quick that I want to point out. One was a story that you and John did an exclusive on the private companies that are involved in the U.S. Army's promise to have at least one working next-generation mobile nuclear reactor in operation by 2026. Let me slowly say that again. Mobile nuclear reactor. We're talking about essentially a power plant that can be forward deployed. It's pretty wild stuff. A second story from AUSA, Ben, was the exclusive that John Seward reported out on a new partnership between U.S. and Israeli companies to develop advanced self-destructing drone capabilities for American soldiers. It's all about the world of so-called loitering munitions, Ben. Of course, we're also going to hear in a few minutes in our feature interview from Raytheon, RTX, the interview that John Seward conducted on the floor of AUSA.
Yeah, I mean, look, the nuclear power story you mentioned was very interesting, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how the Army actually implements that plan. It's part of President Trump's executive order, of course, to kind of reinvigorate nuclear power in the United States. Beyond that, as you would expect, drones were front and center at AUSA, and I was fortunate enough to talk again to a friend of the show, Lieutenant General Chris Mohan, the Deputy Commanding General and Acting Commander of Army Materiel Command, about what they're doing with 3D printing of small drone bodies. We talked about this with General Mohan on the podcast a few months ago, but we went into a little bit more detail in an exclusive threat status video from AUSA, and he explained how the Army believes it can move 3D printers into a theater like the Pacific, for example, and print drone bodies there on site. Other components of the drones, like the motors, for example, would still have to be shipped in, but printing the actual bodies in theater would be a huge time and cost savings for the United States Army, and it could give the U.S. an edge over an adversary like China if, for example, a potential conflict turns into a war of attrition involving drone swarms and hellscapes, as we've discussed previously here in the show. One final thing that was sort of hanging in the background of AUSA, and that is that yesterday, being Wednesday, as we record this on Thursday, Wednesday at the Pentagon, members of the resident press corps, with the exception of One America News Network and its representatives, had to turn in their hard passes to the building and clear out their desks. Networks have until Friday to clear out camera equipment and other stuff from inside the Pentagon. This is all because news networks other than OANN, that includes Fox News, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's former employer, refused to sign the Pentagon's new restrictive press policy. We've covered this on the show in great detail several times, so we don't need to go over, everything contained in that policy other than the overarching point that it essentially says reporters could be considered a security risk for doing their jobs and gathering information the government doesn't want released. Doing journalism, in other words. The Washington Times did not sign that document, and that means that we are losing our dedicated workspace in what's known as correspondence corridor inside the Pentagon complex. So I doubt that this story is over. We'll see where it goes, if anywhere, in terms of the legal front of this. But we're definitely in kind of a new phase, I think, in journalists' relationship with the Defense Department, which it's worth keeping in mind, is the largest federal department with a budget approaching nearly $1 trillion and is the single largest employer of any kind in the United States. For context, Walmart is number 2 and Amazon is number 3. So it's worth just keeping that in mind when journalists talk about why we need good, honest coverage of the Defense Department. It's because it's literally the biggest and most powerful single entity in the United States.
We're joined now by retired Army Colonel Joe DeAntona, a vice president for requirements and capabilities at land and air defense systems at Raytheon, a business of RTX. Sir, thanks so much for joining us on the Threat Status podcast. We've seemed to made a habit of this.
Yes.
We're sitting on the floor of AUSA. We're actually tucked behind a truck so that we can get a little bit of quiet. And I appreciate you taking the time, sir.
Well, John, it's always a pleasure. I've enjoyed my conversations with you in the past, and I'm sure today is going to be just the same.
Well, I want to jump right into it. You talked yesterday about reimagining fires. Looking around at this conference, we see a lot of small UAS systems, and you even mentioned it as well during that talk about cost effectiveness.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? How are you thinking about Patriot, and how is RTX thinking about the challenges that we're seeing in terms of cost effectiveness, especially sort of the watchword is the lessons learned in Ukraine right now?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And to your point, I mean, we were just up at lunch. We listened to the Chief of Staff of the Army provide some direction and counsel to the audience here at AUSA, and that was a very common theme. We've got to provide capability to our warfighters. We insist that the capabilities that we're providing are still the best in the world, but we also have to do so with a cost mindset of driving down the cost curve that it takes for our soldiers to win on the modern day battlefield. At Raytheon, we have embraced exactly what the chief has talked about. And I will tell you that, we do build high-end capabilities. We've also found ourselves being able to exercise some what I would call kind of originality and trying to anticipate Army demands. The very truck that we're sitting behind right now is an autonomous vehicle. It is an autonomous vehicle that we took to Project Convergence, which is an Army exercise where you bring the latest technology.
Right.
And if you think about this truck that we have right now, this truck is both an offensive and a defensive fires launcher station. So imagine now, rather than having to develop two independent solutions, an offensive, which is what we do today. We have offensive launchers and we have defensive launchers.
Right.
Imagine the savings and the synergies if you can create a common launcher that does both of those. And that's what this Deep Fire's autonomous launcher is designed to do. We took it out to Project Convergence. The Chief of Staff of the Army was out there. It was literally moving around the battle space with no operators on it. And we started to check off a lot of those wants that the chief and that the larger Army has been challenging us to do. So when you have fewer soldiers, when you have fewer major end items, but you're not foregoing the technology that is needed to bring to bear the types of combat power that we have, I think we're hitting that soft spot for the Army.
And so you're saying that it reminds me of our last conversation. We started to talk about this cost effective. It was a little bit off on the horizon. And one of the things that you had mentioned was, we also need to look at quality versus quantity, right? Developing more quality systems because that is cost effective.
Exactly.
If I remember right, you were basically saying, hey, like the dollars and cents, yes, it is a high quality, expensive system, But if it can do more with less,
Exactly.
then you're winning that fight that the chief's talking about.
Well, one of the most scarce resources, frankly, in our Army, but frankly in armies around the world, are people.
Right.
We talk about
Right.
things in dollars and cents, but I've always said resources take on three major categories: time, money, and people. And so if you are trying to drive down the resource requirement, you have to look at it through those three dimensions. We get focused on money, right? Because budgets are all tied to that. But the truth is if you can reduce the pressure on time, if you can reduce the requirements for the number of people, and you can drive down the cost curve, you are truly achieving what it is that our Army is asking us to do. It's not just the dollars and cents.
That's right. It's a value add system.
You betcha.
If you can hit each of those.
Exactly.
You mentioned our partners around the world. Obviously, they too are very concerned about for meeting these new challenges.
Mm-hmm.
When you talked yesterday about reimagining fires, what are some of the things that, as you look at the conflict and as new development happens, you're worried about, you're looking out for, that you want to see as part of change and development in the Army?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. The good news is we have the world's greatest Army. And the world's greatest Army is capable of doing things that maybe many other armies are not capable of doing. And so I think in some cases we have to acknowledge that while we are heading down a revolutionary change to how we are going to war, many of our partners desire to come with us, but they're probably not positioned to do so at the speed and at the urgency with which we are doing it. And so my caution, I think, or the thing that I think about is building partner capacity is a cornerstone of our national defense and our national security strategy. And it's been a consistent one. As we revolutionize our Army, we should do so with a keen eye that we are not leaving our partners behind. How do we bring them along? In the perfect world, they would just do what we're doing.
Right.
But
Sure.
Their armies are designed sometimes to do different things than ours. So how do we build flexibility in our revolution such that we can bring them along with us, bring their resources along with us, but also respect and acknowledge that they may not be exactly like us. And so our exact solution might not necessarily be their exact solution. And I think we have to have the flexibility, certainly in industry, as a global industry leader like RTX is, we have to look at this from a global perspective. We are laser focused on the U.S., but we are laser focused on the U.S. while also looking broadly at the international community, whether it's in the Middle East, Europe, the Pacific, in the Americas. Every one of them has a similar goal, but their approach or their ability to keep pace with us may not be the same as ours. And I just don't want us to wake up one day and think and realize that maybe we outran our coverage.
Right.
Our part in our very noble efforts to revolutionize how we're doing things, what we've created now potentially and unintentionally is a gap between what we can do and what our international partners are able to do with us.
Well, and on that same page, it's also a lot of shared tactics, techniques, procedures, and if you're really pulling away from those, then you're not able to fight next to your partners and allies on the battlefield in a way that's effective.
That's exactly it. I mean, at the end of the day, and the Chief of Staff of the Army foot stomped it 2 times during the lunch today. It's about our warfighters.
Right.
And part of ensuring that our warfighters are successful is to make sure that they have the best available.
Sure.
But it's also to make sure that the other soldiers that they're fighting with who don't wear the U.S. uniform have the best available for them as well. And that gets back to that partner capacity thing that you and I have been talking about.
And I don't want to miss this because I took note of it yesterday. General Henke, the commandant of the Air Defense Facility Schoolhouse, he mentioned this. He said our tactics are not changing. Our techniques are not changing. They're adjusting slightly for new technology, but we need to rely on our understanding of the basics and know how to conduct air defense.
Absolutely. Air defense is a science with art sprinkled across it. And I think the general hit on something that is absolutely true. The fundamental foundations of integrated air and missile defense are not changing. We are going to provide technologies and capabilities that are going to allow them to take those fundamental principles and advance them. But you can't advance a fundamental principle if you don't know it and if it's not your core. So I think his counsel and his verbiage is just that. We have to continue to build the foundation so that we can advance it with the technologies and with the capabilities that we have, and frankly, in response to the way the threat is advancing their capability.
So I would be completely remiss in my job as a journalist if I didn't ask you about the way that the Golden Dome missile defense system is sort of talk of the town. Obviously, RTX is going to have a part in that. Patriot and THAAD both are going to feature in part of that. What are you excited for? What do you see on the horizon in that?
Well, I'm always excited about filling mission area gaps. And, in the big scheme of things, I think we're still trying to understand the prioritization of Golden Dome for America. It's a lofty ambition. We've got the full support and a brand new. Well, so a brand new one in the respect that it's here today and now, and it wasn't a couple of years ago. But we've kind of been down this. Like the Cold War took us down this lane. The Reagan years of the '80s took us down this lane. So it's almost like something that's coming back based on 21st century threats and requirements.
Right.
But we've kind of studied this before, and I will tell you that we are excited to be part of the Team USA that is going to come together, uniform, industry, civilian leaders. Team USA is going to come together, and we are going to produce and present to the American people something that they can be proud of.
Well, and if I take you there, sir, a huge part of what I've been understanding about as this sort of slowly develops, we learn more about it, is the collaboration factor.
Yes.
It is not going to be one headliner or
right.
one system. It's going to be a whole host of these things to
exactly
try to solve a threat.
And I'm telling you, the brain trust that is being committed to this mission set is exciting. I'm going to tell you, I have 40 years in this business, 30 in uniform, 10 in industry. I'd like to say that I've got some longitudinal skills and experiences in the air and missile defense arena. Golden Dome for America is challenging me in ways that I'm excited about, because it's frankly causing me to validate maybe some hypotheses that I've had in the past. It's also requiring me to go back and validate things that were true at one point, but maybe they're not true today.
Sure.
So I'm getting a PhD as a result of Golden Dome for America.
Well, sir, thank you for coming on to the Threat Status Podcast. I really appreciate it. I look forward to keeping in touch with you.
John, I'm always available to you.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, weekly segment here in the show where Guy and I will each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world, that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week as you all are listening to the show. Guy, what do you have for us as your threat of the week?
My threat of the week, Ben, is that China is beginning to wield its economic instrument of power over the United States in the national security realm at a level previously unseen. Recent days saw the Chinese Communist Party issue major new curbs on the export out of China of a wide slate of rare earth critical minerals. This is a wake-up call, Ben. China controls 80% of the world's reserves of 17 key rare earth metals. We're talking about stuff that's critical to the manufacture of everything from microchips to cell phones to the brains of fighter jets. Reliance and dependence on China for these rare earths has deep and sobering implications, Ben. My threat of the week is that Beijing's move now to start clamping down on access that the U.S. and its partners have to rare earths is like a shot across the bow of great power competition in 2025, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, Ben. This could lead to a dramatic and sudden escalation in U.S.-China tensions. That's my threat of the week, and we're tracking it at threat status, Ben.
Yeah, got my thread of the week also involves the U.S. and China, but from a slightly different angle, and it's about AI-powered academic research, the kind done by so-called paper mills in China and elsewhere. It's one of those rare instances where it actually seems to me like the U.S. and China might be aligned to at least some degree in terms of stopping this, the kind of thing that could pose threats to the quality of academic research around the world. China's state-run China Central Television, or CCTV, earlier this week ran a lengthy piece in which it said that paper mill workers using generative AI chatbots helped them complete over 30 academic articles a week. Apparently, one Wuhan-based agency had over 40,000 orders each year, with prices ranging from a few $100s to several $1,000s to produce academic papers. This is important, at least in China, because they have strict publishing requirements for folks in academia, and these AI-powered paper mills can help them meet those goals. And the AI bots, of course, as we talk about often on the show, are getting more and more sophisticated, and this is becoming harder to catch. Of course, the question is this happening in the U.S. as well? And the answer is yes, though maybe not to the same degree. Back in August, researchers published an extensive study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences about the use of paper mills in the U.S. being used to churn out low-quality research. And the researchers, according to a New York Times piece detailing their work, compiled a list of 30,000 papers that either had to be retracted because they were written through a paper mill, or they haven't been retracted but show signs of coming from a paper mill. So all this means it's getting harder and harder to know how much research is being written by human beings. Now, of course, AI does help a great deal in research. It helps Guy and I transcribe interviews and hunt through databases when we're doing stories. But it's a threat because if we start getting inaccurate papers being spat out by AI and folks like us, journalists or other researchers, doctors, taking them as fact, suddenly we've built a house of cards in the academic research world that could potentially impact all of us going forward, Guy.
It's totally interesting, Ben. And I'm going to keep an eye on your thread of the week.
Of course. Well, thanks for that, Guy, and a huge thanks to everybody at AUSA, of course, for making us feel so welcome there, including our colleague, John Seward, for that fantastic interview from the floor of AUSA. And a big thanks to all of you, of course, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share with all of your friends, and Guy and I will be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.